Good afternoon. How's everyone today?
Good.
Forgetful.
We'll hear that. Before Joe talks, I have a brief announcement. How many of you have seen the healthcare movie? What?
The healthcare movie.
How many of you have seen the healthcare movie? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
How many of us would like to see the healthcare movie?
How many of you would like to see the healthcare movie? Well, the next opportunity is June 6th at 7 p.m. at NYSNA, New York State Nurses Association. They're co-sponsoring it with the FAPL District Healthcare Alliance. And it's at NYSNA headquarters, which is in British American Development, west of the airport. And it's open to the public and it's free. And there will be refreshments and discussion. Now, to introduce Joe Krausman to talk to us about his book, it's hard to know how to describe Joe. Is he a thespian? Is he a Yiddishist? Is he a playwright? Is he a poet? And the answer to that is yes. He's all of those things and more. Like Mel Brooks, he grew up in Brooklyn and went to Brooklyn College. I'm not sure if Mel Brooks went to college. He didn't go to college. But Joe, he has graduate degrees from other universities. He's a published poet, playwright, and public intellectual, I would say. It's a privilege to welcome Joe to speak here. One warning, Joe speaks very rapidly from subject to subject, so you're going to have to listen carefully and fast.
Thank you very much. Everybody should have had 3 handouts. There are a few here. One is the 7 sins. The other is a bibliography of people who have written about memory. And the other is a brain for people who can use an extra one. It's a brain thing right over there. So if you are here, you should have 3. Coming here this morning, I committed at least 4 of the sins. And unfortunately, I put my glasses down, and this is called the sin of absent-mindedness, and I didn't know where I put them. Then I was looking for this tie clip, which I put on top of something, and I couldn't find it. But the worst sin, which I haven't recovered from yet, is this. I am on about 10 different things. 1, Facebook, Wayne, LinkedIn, Hotmail, AOL, with Facebook, and a zillion other things. Each one has a code. So I wanted to go into my Hotmail, and I used to go into it directly, but now I have to go in through Outlook, which has a code too. Forgot all of them. So I typed something in to get in. They said you have the wrong this, the wrong that. I got fed up. I walked away. So we have to memorize so many numbers, and certain numbers were locked in at a younger age. For example, my military number, which I haven't used in a half a century, 518-298-383. Why do I remember that? And most people don't forget their serial number. And I never call it up. I never have to use it. But that's locked in. But if you tell me something 3 minutes ago, I'll forget it. So that's one of the sins that I committed today. Absent-mindedness, transit, and the sin of blocking. So basically, all of you, I would say, not that I'm going to speak for you, probably committed every one of these. Where did I put my glasses? And also, a lot of people who do these absent-minded things are brilliant people who you wouldn't think that's the case. In fact, there was an article, I was going to mention two people who just by chance happened to be mentioned in New York Times today. One is, I forgot his name. He's a professor at MIT. He's the guy who came up with the word cybernetics. His name is?
Norbert Wiener.
Norbert Wiener. So Norbert Wiener graduated from Tufts. He was 15, still a professor at MIT. And his short-term memory was very bad, even though while he was a genius. And one example of the story is he stops a kid in a hallway coming, and he said, "By the way, which way was I going?" He said, "Going that way." He said, "Oh, that means I already had my lunch." Basically, this guy who knows everything, when it came to these little things, he would forget immediately. So lots of people who have great memories and are brilliant may have no short-term memory. And even in today's Times, there was an article about HM, who's mentioned in the section on transients. HM, in fact, he gives, I know his name is HM from the book by Schachter, because his real name is, I have to look it up, HM, was in today's paper, and I'm just going to mention him. Can't find it. But anyway, HM had severe epilepsy, and they did surgery on his brain. And right after the surgery, in the temporal lobe, he would talk to you, and he'd forget everything. We'd have dinner. So basically, one of the things the article in the paper said today, which we discovered different areas of the brain control different areas of memory. For example, the occipital lobe would be vision memory, and the temporal lobe would, and so basically, and now with the tomography and MRI, you can tell which area the firing and so on. Well, what I'm going to do is go quickly through the 7 sins, and in each sin, Schachter gives examples and also things you can do about it to alleviate problems that come from these sins. However, one of the books of memory that is very, very good, learned. Some people are born with memories that, call it genetic, where they can't forget anything. That's a problem that's going to come up later. But Joshua 4, what he did is he entered the national memory contest, where you had to remember a zillion things, and he had a normal memory. He won it. He would stay up, and one of the ways is repeat, and he won it. Then he went to the one in Europe, so he could learn to have a memory so good that he would win a national contest. And there's a place where they give you 60 digits, and you have to remember every. Give me 8, forget about it. And so here's what he said before I go on. The brain is a costly organ. Though it accounts for 2% of the body's mass, it uses up 1/5 of all the energy you breathe. 1/4 of a glucose gets burned. The brain is the most energetically expensive piece of equipment in our body, and has been ruthlessly honed by natural selection to be efficient at the tasks we have. And then he speaks about ancient Greece, of the great epics of Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey. And he said basically, before writing, that was oral tradition. Before writing, how did people? Well, they had storytellers, they tell X, and one way of memorizing had to do with rhythm and music and so on. And basically, over the time, according to this, those stories changed. Whether there was a person called a Homer, that's debated today. So you had to have a prodigious memory to tell these long, long, long stories. And one of the things that were in a Homeric this is a claim of war, these epithets, like clever Odysseus, rosy-fingered Dawn, laughing Aphrodite, and he claimed here is the reason they add that, because it helped to memorize. Even when Aphrodite wasn't laughing, they would use these epithets in order to have a rhythm and a beat And then by the time it was codified, because it was a great invention, instead of going from an oral tradition, it went to not writing. And writing then became codified. So now we know them in the last codified way. But basically, according to this theory, they changed all the time. And how did people remember? Well, they remembered through tricks. Now, what are the tricks, which also Schachter speaks about? Words that rhyme are much more memorable than words that don't. Concrete nouns are easier to remember than abstract. Dynamic images more memorable than static images. Alliteration aids memory. You can attest to this with jingles and music. The da 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 da. Now, kids who learned something when they were 5 will know it when they're 90 because it's Humpty Dumpty sat on a inclined plane, a thing fell and fractured his cranium, and Jill came sometime later. No, Humpty Dumpty, even the name, sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. See, you know, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. See? And you may have learned it 60 years ago, but you forgot what you had for breakfast today. Because the memory is musical. And even the name, Mickey Mouse, Humpty Dumpty, Donald Duck, da-da-da-da-da. But it was Donald Abercrombie, the thing is easy to memorize. So the alliteration, the musicality, and so on. Now, one of the people mentioned on my list, one of my favorite writers is Oliver Sacks. He wrote the book Musicophilia. And in that book, people who can't remember anything, a guy looks at his wife, he doesn't remember his name. Then he'll sit down and piano player, because that's a different area of the brain. And where the fingers move is also memory. For example, if you type 80 words a minute, that means every second you're putting in, a word, maybe 5 or 6 strokes. In maybe a second, you're doing 9 strokes. That's already, you're not thinking. You've locked it in, it goes. So basically, how can you remember? Well, where is the D? If you do that, you can't be a typist. So you don't even think, you go like this, and then you have it. And the same with the piano. You don't have to look at the keys. Guys goes up presto. So how does he know where it is? That's locked in another area of the brain. And he wrote a whole book on it, Sachs, that those areas of the brain are locked in, and you can forget who you are, the name of your wife, but you'll hear a symphony, and if you're a musician, you can play it. So that's a different area. And one thing that you can do now is with the tomography is find out exactly where in the brain those nerves are firing and what's happening there. So that's it. Now, getting back to Schachter, what I've done is I made a list of the 9 sins. And some are sins of omission, meaning you want to remember something and you can't. And the 3 are transience, absent-mindedness, and blocking. The sins of commission, a lot of them are worse. You remember things that didn't happen. You remember things that were suggested that are bad. You remember bias, which could be good and bad. And there's persistence of things you want to forget, but they were traumatic, they hurt, and you really want to get them out. For example, you were in the army, you've seen horrors, and you don't want to remember it, but you can't forget it. So there are things where you want to forget and can't, and the things where you want to remember and can't. So, and to how many people does this happen? If you're a normal person, to everyone. So everything I read, I say, oh yeah, that's me, blocking, and so on. Okay, so what I intend to do, and is go through quickly each one, and then he gives examples of anomalies, of those lapses, or whatever it is. And the first one is transience. Now, transience is, well, over time. So what did I have for lunch 3 weeks ago on Wednesday? There's no need to remember it. And even if there is, it's just been out of your mind for a long time, so you forget about it. And unfortunately, Schachter's a student of aging, and more likely, as we all know, to forget things as you get older because part of the frontal lobe cells die and memory weakens with age. Of course, there are very big exceptions. The woman who just wrote a book, she's 95, still active and working. So this is not necessarily the case, but for most people, as they get older, their memory weakens. Now, there are some very, very nice exceptions to it. A few weeks ago, there was a thing in the New York Times about a woman who's still alive, and she teaches humor. She's a professor at Hunter College, and she teaches Jewish humor. Starts off with a joke. The Frenchman says, "I'm tired and thirsty, I must have wine." The German says, "I'm tired and thirsty, I must have beer." The Jew says, "I'm tired and thirsty, I must have diabetes." Now, that's funny. And she teaches a class. Now, the question is, her husband is 94, but she says the reason he goes out with me is because he likes older women. Now, the question is, how old is he? She's still teaching now at Hunter. How old is she? Give a guess.
95.
She's 101.
Wow.
And her memory's still good. And she said, Miss Kaufman graduated from Hunter College in 1934, just 11 years after emigrating from the Soviet Union. And she says that when she wanted to get a teaching license, she couldn't get it because she had a foreign accent. And one of the tests was to discuss this poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay. And they said, well, no, your English isn't good, and we don't like the answer you gave to that poem. She sent the poem to Edna St. Vincent Millay. Said, that's the best writing I ever saw in my poem. You caught it right well. But anyway, she got her license. And then she wrote the famous book, Up the Down Staircase, which became a major hit about schools in New York. So that's a prodigious memory for someone who's 100. The good side is that's an exception. She's 100 years old, and she's probably the oldest practicing professor. So that's the plus side for people who say it's not necessarily the case. As far as losing, yes. Put it this way, I think there's a song with that. It ain't necessarily so. So that's the upside. And there was also recently in the paper a obit of a woman, and sometimes memory is not a matter of study, it's just genetic luck, or the technical term for that is mazel. It just happened that it's an Indian woman, Shakuntala Devi, the human computer. Now, she's born in a place in India and demonstrated her mathematical gifts in the world competition. Check this out. She extracted the 23rd root of a 201-digit number. Now, I can't remember 5 numbers. In 1980, said she correctly multiplied 13-digit numbers, 2 13-digit numbers. That's like trillion, right? Let me see. 6 is a million, 9 is right. It's trillion. Twice, the numbers she gives, they give you here, 2, 4, 6, 5, 0, 9, 9, 7, 4, 7, 9 times 7, 8. Okay, has the answer right away. The upside of it, she was about 3 years old, playing with cards. She knew every card. She won fame, and she went all over the world, and she supported her family and everybody just by her study. She went to Europe, she just did it, and she toured Europe and was on TV and so on, and she performed in New York City. She could give you the cube root of 188,132,517 as soon as you asked her. This is what we call an outlier, prodigy, and so on. And she died at the age of 83, and lots of times when people have these great memories, you would think they'd be messed up in another way, like the Rain Man. It had a tremendous memory, but she was, they're married with children, also a successful cookbook author and novelist, and led a normal life, Now, this you can't learn. I mean, she's just born with it. And if you were to ask anyone here, I don't know you people, to multiply 2 20-digit numbers by each other, forget about it. me 3 would, 5,897 times 6,182. Forget about it, I can't even add 2 and 2. But basically, this is an outlier. One more outlier, which I thought was interesting, was they had a thing in the New York Times a while ago. I was going to read the obituaries to see if I'm there. I'm not happy for the day. In any case, this guy, Francis Sommer, he was a linguist. You know, he's a guy's bilingual, trilingual, quadrilingual. So he holds the record for being fluent in a number of languages. Test, how many?
15.
One more guess.
30.
One more guess. Okay. Each location has its Babe Ruth. The champion is Francis Sommer, fluent in 94 languages. Mr. Sommer died in 1978. He grew up in Speyer, Germany. Whatever it is about him, he learned Swedish, Sanskrit, Persian. On a visit to Russia, he picked up all the European languages. By the time in the 1920s, after emigrating to the U.S., he found work as a research librarian. And this is also something you can't learn. There was another guy, Mr. Williams, who spoke 58 languages, showed off by conversing with every delegate in the League of Nations in his own language. Now, these are what we call unique genetic advantage. Although Foer learned to improve his memory to a certain degree, but this is someone born with it, and I don't think anyone here, if they could do 10, that would be monumental. 90, well, he got the record, Babe Ruth of language, and basically, he said, it's kind of funny, he said, if I learned one more, I think my head would split open. He said, I had enough. 94, he said, I'm afraid to cram any more words into my head. Either the top will come off, or I wake up a babbling idiot. but that's, so 94 may be the maximum for him. Who knows? Maybe, some people have broken Babe Ruth's record. Maybe someone will do 95. But, so these are what I would call outliers, but I just found that interesting. And anyway, let's get back to business. Okay, so here you have the 7 sins, and what Shakti does, he'll give an example of the sin, and also ways to, some of them to alleviate them. Sometimes drugs may help someone even with Alzheimer's, this ginkgo biloba, they're not sure. But anyway, okay, so the first one is transience, which we all have memory weakening over time, and that happens to all of us, as you know. And older people, as I said before, have more difficulty than younger ones. And in this article, so just by chance today, he mentions HM, who was, I mentioned before, and it was just in today's Times, HM is mentioned, and HM had surgery for severe epilepsy, and it's right here in transience. And then after he came out of the surgery, he couldn't remember what happened 2 minutes ago. A very nice guy, and the woman who studied him was written up in the New York Times today, and the area of the brain was some area near the temporal lobe, which is in the picture, and he could do math, he could do everything, but he would just forget everything. He would forget everything. There was a guy in Russia by the name of Alexander Luria, and he did the diary of a mnemonist about a man, Cherishevsky, I think was his name, who never forgot anything, and Alexander Luria studied him. He never forgot. Now you'd say, that's great, he never forgot anything. You'd think that has its downside, because in order to think and construct, you have to discern, and basically, the fact that he couldn't forget anything made him less wise, because you have to say, well, I won't count that, but if everything is in your head, that makes you, in some sense, less wise. There's a beautiful story by Borges called Funes the Memorious. He can't forget anything, and that's basically not good, because you have to make decisions, and to make a decision, well, I can't consider, it's already there. Well, that doesn't count, it's already there. So basically, you would think, well, if you can't forget anything, make it brother. Sometimes it makes you less intelligent. So that's the reverse of not being able to discern or select. So it's not necessarily a plus. So transience over time, you forget. Okay, absent-mindedness, forget about it. That's what we. And absent-mindedness, this woman won the national championship on memory, but she couldn't remember where she put her keys. So when she's making a list, I'll remember this and this, but the ordinary stuff she couldn't remember. Schachter himself said that he couldn't remember anything. You know, he's a world expert on memory. He said, but these little things, it's a different area of the brain. So she's remembering all these lists and so on, and she said, I'm incredibly absent-minded. I have to use sticky pads. I forget where I put them. And she has a fantastic memory for the things she studied, but the ordinary stuff, and just absent-minded. So if you're coming here today to give a talk on memory, and then you put your keys down, where did I put them down? As I said, I wasn't. Already today it happened to me. And then the phone rings where you're going somewhere. So basically you're distracted, and distraction will ruin. You know, you're going here, the phone rings, someone calls. Oh, where was I going? You were going to check the boiling water. Now you're on the phone, and then you hear smoke and so on, because you were distracted. So the distraction made you forget what you wanted to do. I always put my glasses in the same place, but sometimes I'm changing my shirt somewhere else. I put my glasses down. I said, where are my glasses? You know, I just put them down. But because you don't put them where you usually put them, or the keys. And sometimes you are smart, so you want to park your car, and you get to parking lots you don't know, so you say, I'll park next to that big truck. And then the big truck moves. So basically, but that's absent-mindedness. Now, if I were going in to say Price Chopper for 5 minutes, would be okay. But if I were to stop, say, at a huge mall and walk around for 2 hours and not making it say, well, there should be a number by pole 24 and Sears is over here, then I'd look maybe sometimes for 15 or 20 minutes where it was. So basically, what you do is you make a marker. So, okay, so absent-mindedness is another thing, and then there are ways to, you know, by keeping things in order. The greatest memory device ever invented was a pencil. Another thing you have is a checklist. Another thing, too, which is called a flash drive. On this, you want to write and put your whole life on it. So writing makes a big difference. Lists make a difference. Music makes a difference. And memory makes a difference. And I was in the place called the Co-op. I meet a guy, and I knew where he worked. I knew what he did, but I forgot his name. And the last time I saw him about a year ago, he said, "What's my name?" But you said you would remember it. I said, "I forgot." He said, "Let me give you a trick." He said, "You see my nose? It looks like a big bill, and it's sharp. My name is Bill Sharp." Now I won't forget it. Now, I guarantee you won't forget it, because he visualized it. Bill Sharp. The guy who wrote this book, Daniel Schachter. And I thought his name, for some reason, was Gerald Schachter. He said, "I'll give you a way to memorize my name. When you think of Daniel in the lion's den, and then he was hiding out in a den or a shack. Get it? Daniel Shack." I won't forget it now, because I visualize it. If you see an image, I won't say Gerald Schachter, even now, Daniel Schachter. So these mnemonic devices work. There's the famous Baker-Baker paradox, which also has to do with blocking. You know a guy, his name is Jim Baker. You don't relate it to anything, just like someone's name is Jack Smith. And Jack Smith, 10 people are called Smith. However, if you meet a person and he says, "I'm a Smith," a blacksmith, then you see someone. Right? So you have something to visualize. He said, "My name is Jim, I'm a baker," and you can see case and so on. So what the Baker-Baker, there's such a thing called the Baker-Baker paradox. If you can relate the name to something that you can see, you have a much better idea of memorizing it. And then he gives all kinds of tricks where the names like rhyme or Humpty Dumpty, whatever it is. But basically, that's a common paradox. A guy named is Taylor, you know, but he's a common name because a lot of names come from English to trade names, you know, Baker, Potter, or tailor, a carpenter. So, but if you think of the person as a carpenter, and then when you see him, you say, oh yeah, you see his face and you see his hand movies, and you see, oh yeah, that's Jim Carpenter. So these are little mnemonic devices that may or may not work, but they work to some extent. At least I will never call him Gerald Schachter again, because I think of Daniel in the Lion's Den. And so we can visualize it, we can put it in a room, and that's another memory device. Now, forgetting the names is also called blocking. And a lot of, this is shocking to me, a lot of people who are, what do they call them, baby boomers, one of the greatest fears, it's not that horrible, is that, well, that they'll forget to remember. That they don't remember. And they did a study, oh, that I may lose my memory. And the fact is, everything is a matter of degree. Certainly my memory isn't as good as it was, but that's a great fear of people. First, when I was a kid, the word Alzheimer's didn't even exist. But the woman who wrote a very nice book, Miss Lear, said, for a lot of people, that's an unwarranted fear. The other thing with Alzheimer's, why are so many people getting this disease of memory loss now? When we were kids, it was called being senile. One reason is because the way the brain is constructed, by the time they reach that age, they would be dead. In other words, he said people live to 35 or 45-year-old, so something else would kill you before. So he said the way the brain is constructed, at least is one of the theories, it's not constructed to last that long. So at the time someone is, say, 99, some of those cells will go. You can still be functioning pretty well, but your memory generally won't be as good unless you're Mrs. Professor at Hunter, who's 100. I mean, these are exceptions. But as I said, the good part is there are a lot of people like that, but some loss occurs with almost everyone. And when you block a name, you have the trip. So now here's a test. Okay. And some names you don't use, you try to call them up. So here Schachter's giving you a test. Say there's 4 things, and you may have blocked it because it never came up recently. See if you can pass the test. Okay. Someone says, what's a metal-tipped spear that in contest is thrown a distance? I said, what metal spear? Can you come up with it?
Javelin.
Javelin. Okay, so some people never use it. They would forget it or would just be out. Okay. Inscription on a tomb. I didn't come up. Epitaph. Right. Good. Okay. So some people, a broad blade knife or a hatchet used by butchers.
Cleaver.
Oh, good. Good. See, you guys know all this stuff. Incombustible material used in fireproofing. It's not asbestos. Asbestos, right. So basically, these are tests you give to people, and some people may not, it's not even a memory lapse, they maybe never heard of a javelin, or they never used the word epitaph, so they wouldn't know it. But basically, that's not a TOT, meaning it's not on the tip of your tongue. In fact, in a lot of countries, they have the word in foreign language for the tip of the tongue. Sulla punta della lingua. In Afrikaans, up the punt von mijn tongue. And in Africa, there are words because you know it and you can't get it out. Damn, I know that. It starts with the letter M and what's his name? Murray, Mann. In fact, recently I had a picture of a friend, and gee, I can't remember his name. I know he was in Germany. You know about him because names are the most common black thing. I said, I can see him now. He's in Germany. He speaks Turkish. He speaks this language. He speaks that. And I know his name. And I know it starts with a G. So I'm going to say, G. Finally, what happens with it, when you don't want it, it pops into your head when you're not thinking of it. I could be sitting with my friends in Krausman and say, what's the name of that movie? And you try. And then when you're walking down the street thinking of something else, pops up. Anyway, finally, 3 days later, I say, his name is Peter Kansen. Doesn't start with a G. Totally different name. But it just popped into my head when I wasn't trying to remember it. And that was just blocked and I knew it, and I forgot. Now, there are places where you forget because you haven't used it. That's not blocked. So if you go to a party, say this is Janie Jones and John Smith and so on, 5 minutes I forget them all. But if you forget the name of someone you know for many years, that could be a problem. But that happens to me all the time. So and then you're embarrassed because you're at the party and you say, well, this is my wife Jane, and you're with your wife, and the husband's name you forgot. So basically, that's very, very common, and it happens to everyone. So these are sins of omission. Now, commission causes many, many problems. A lot of them have to do with the law, and a lot of them are deadly serious because sometimes a sin of commission could wind up in death, or misattribution would be a very, very, very dangerous sin, where you think something happened that didn't happen. And that's very bad because, particularly if it's a lineup, and you say, that's the guy who did it. And you're sure he did it, except it isn't the person. So that's a misattribution. Now, with the misattribution, I have a little thing in a song, and if you know the play Gigi, this is a song where people are reminiscing about what happened when they were young and lovers, and they misattribute everything. See if you can hear it.
Thank heaven for little girls.
misattribution. They're both remembering things that never happened for whatever reason, and they're saying, oh, I remember it well when that happened, but it never happened. And that happens lots of times where people are sure something occurred. They do this in a classroom. They will take, it's pre-rehearsed, and someone will come into the teacher and say, you took my wallet, my pencil, and then they ask the kids what happened. They said, what color was he wearing? A blue hat? Yes, but he did this. They're totally wrong, but they're convinced. Danger in lineups, danger where someone is accusing someone. They think something happened, it didn't happen. Sometimes they may be lying, but they're convinced this happened. The person was wearing a blue hat, he did this, particularly if another thing is suggested, and then it didn't happen. Then why do they believe it? Because something comes into their head through suggestion, and they believe it. Very dangerous when you're doing a trial and someone is convinced, oh, I saw him in line, but he did it. So basically, that's a very dangerous thing. Also where people are accused of crimes and they're innocent, and the person who is the witness is absolutely positive. Another thing, people will confess to things that they didn't do, which is also another case of thing. The other major problem is suggestibility, which is another sin of commission, where someone will say something and then you'll think it's true. For example, this starts with this: a plane crashed in Amsterdam, killed 39 people, and residents, it was in the papers, and they said, did you see the TV show of the film where the plane crashed? Did you watch it? They said, did you see that? So 55% said, yes. We said, it didn't happen. But when they say, oh, did you see it? They saw the aftermath. More than half of people said, yes, we saw it, except it wasn't on TV. They couldn't have seen it. The suggestion that you saw it makes you think you saw it, but it never happened. Now, they're not lying. It just crept in through suggestion, and it never happened. So that's another case where people will think something happened, and it didn't. And they'll remember clothing that people never wore, and there'll be false confessions where they think they did it because the guy said, well, you killed this person, didn't you? Particularly it's a young kid. I know a lot about the case of a person in Long Island who was accused, and they said, you did it, your father told us you did it, you killed this person. Meanwhile, he didn't do it, but he served 17 years in jail because of that. So there are confessions where people will believe it because of the suggestion. And another major problem with suggestion had to do with child molestation, where people said they did. And the tragedy, in some cases, it's true. So someone will say, there was a big school case in Malden where they say the people who are running this center molested the kids. I don't even know whether it happened or not, but you go to a 3-year-old, didn't they do this? That's the way that, didn't your teacher touch you here? The kid is 3. That's the difference between young, they're more open to didn't. Now, it either happened or it didn't. That's then for the courts to decide. But basically, kids will pick it up because it said so. And that's the danger in legal situations and so on. Or someone will say people are getting divorced, and the wife will say, well, he molested the kid, and then you programmed the kid, didn't your daddy do this, that? Now, what I'm saying, it could be true or false, but children, adults, are open to suggestion, and that could be very, very costly, even to the point where someone will die because of it. So, and that's a legal problem that still hasn't been solved. There are false confessions of people on death row where they're convinced now through science that they didn't do it. However, but suggestibility, now another area next to the last one is bias. Now sometimes bias is good, particularly for people who think better of themselves than they really are, because that type of bias can make you a happier person. In fact, there was a woman who said, and if you think you're worse than you are, that can make you worse. So certain biases, according to this woman, said that certain biases can work in your favor. People will rewrite the past, and if you know the stories of, let me see what I have here. see, I love something there. See, I keep forgetting things. I should give in this report. He said, okay, this is from Barbara Streisand. The way we were. Memories may be beautiful, and yet what's too painful to remember, we choose to forget. So basically, the bias is, it didn't happen. The problem with the next one is just the opposite. You want to forget it, it's traumatic, and you can't. So basically, the bias is, and one of the problems with bias relates to racial prejudice, where you have a bias and you remember things that didn't happen about certain ethnic groups, and some of it is horrible. For example, one of the great experts on IQ testing was a guy by the name of Goddard, and he was studying people, and here's what he concluded. Feeble-mindedness, and he just studied 83% of Jews, 80% of Hungarians, 79% of Italians, and 87% of Russians are feeble-minded. I didn't come up with these numbers. I mean, these Russians wound up last. but he, and even worse was a guy by the name who was a professor at Harvard, biology, distinguished Davenport, who believed in racial differences, that miscegenation, marriage of different races, would dilute the stock of good genes. So he basically was against, and he also got to know Hitler. Now, who was he? Full professor at Harvard, very, very distinguished person. And he said mixing like the Aryan and the Jewish race, it's not Aryan race, whether they exist, was bad for the, and that's a bias that caused phenomenal harm. However, the person who was promoting that bias wasn't some guy, some nut job. He was a distinguished professor at Harvard, world famous. And he said, well, if you miscegenation, you will get bad stock, whatever that means. You get mishlings of people who will be inferior. Well, so the biases can be very, very, very harmful. And the last one, last one is persistence. Persistence, also very dangerous. Trauma, PTSD, something happens, you can't get it out of your mind. He tells a very interesting story about a baseball player here who played for the Angels 5-4. He throws a pitch. His name is Donnie Moore, and he loses the game. The guy hits a home run. The Angels don't go to the series. He's thoroughly depressed. He can't play anymore. He can't forget it out of his mind. And the captain of the team says, forget about it. You know, you lost the game. You can't forget it. He starts drinking, so on. He winds up killing himself and his wife. And the coach of the team said what killed him was that pitch. Now, of course, there may be other things going on, but basically, it persisted his memory. I lost the team. I threw a bad ball. Therefore, I'm no good. And obviously, there were other things going on in his life. So he started fighting with his wife, drinking. Then he killed her, he killed himself, and the guy who was the captain of the team said that pitch killed him, but he couldn't get it out of his mind. The other thing with persistence is people coming back from the war. They've seen horrible things, and they want to forget it. So then they go into psychotherapy and so on. They saw people killing each other, butchering each other, and that's a lot of suicides in the United right now. They just can't forget it. And basically, there's therapy for that, but that's the opposite of the first things of omission. I don't want to know about that. There's a tragedy in your house, someone that people lost a child, a wife, a grief, and sometimes they'll mourn forever, and then you have to go on with your life. But basically, with the PTSD, which is very common, we used to call it shell shock in the old days, there are more therapies and so on for other people who do those things sometimes can't forget. So that's, however, one summary thing here, all these sins that he talks about, here's the switch. He said that they're not sins. All these things that we forget help us survive. It's built in that if you remember all these things, that will block your thinking. So everything that he calls a sin is not a sin, because basically the way we're evolutionarily programmed, all these things help us continue. So they're not cities according to him. So it's kind of very, very interesting. And so, okay, it's 1 o'clock. Let me end. A lot of poets. This is Emily Dixon and The Lost Thought, because I haven't written a lot about memory because I can't remember anything. And this is what she said with, a thought went up my mind today that I have had before, but it did not finish somewhere back. I could not fix the year, nor where it went, or why it came the second time to me, nor definitely what it was I have the art to see. But somewhere in my soul I know I've met the thing before. It just reminded me it was all, and came my way no more. Something came, it went away, and that's it. And that's the way maybe memories go. Okay, that's it. If any questions, I'll take them. Yes.
I was in a play once time, and we were doing the drama, drama. And suddenly, I was on the stage with my wife and myself. And all of a sudden, I realized that we had skipped 8 pages. And I'm wondering, how do we get back to that? I don't know how we got that. So I started ad-libbing. I was good at ad-libbing. So I would start living on it, and I got back to where they started with this 8 pages. So the director walks in. They went up to their shooting rooms, and while the actor was pumping his face, punishing his face, and the director walked in, and he said, "You know something? I've got a great idea." And the guy says, "Yeah, really? What do you want to do?" He said, "Just for the hell of it, why don't we do it like Simon and Neil Simon wrote?" Neil Simon wrote it. All right. And then there was another one in which a guy was on the porch on the Costco, and he and this very guy was in the play, they're getting in an argument, and they're yelling at each other, and he gets so angry that he jumps over the fort on the, you see how last hope it is? But anyhow, he's so mad that he jumps off into the lake. And in the lake, there's a whole big pile of water and everything. He sounded, when he normally jumped, he jumped right into the house. Only this way, the props forgot to put what would happen there was the water would splash water, the prop would throw a lot of water in, and then he would drop a big pile of water, and it really sounded like he really jumped into the lake. And then the woman is looking at the bottom of the stage, and what do we say now? When all of a sudden there's a lamb on one of the railings, and then another rail on one of the railings, and a head comes up, and it says, "God damn, the lake was frozen."
A number of years ago, I met a person. His name is Peter Herko. Has you ever heard of him?
No.
Well, he's a psychic. Now, a psychic, he can't, they won't let him into Las Vegas because he remembers all the cards and all that stuff. Now, that's memory. But he can take, we use him professionally to buy some equipment. We wanted to buy a ball bearing machine, which cost several $100,000. And he put his hand on the machine. It was a used machine. And he says, "The bearings are bad on this machine. It isn't worth that much." Now, what does a psychic do? And what does a guy with a bad memory do?
Well, there were people who believe the psychic is just guessing whether or not he knows that. There was a whole article I read recently on parapsychology. If you believe in it, then it may be the case. A lot of people say that's suggestion and so on. Now, if he's right all the time, then I don't know. But basically, there are people who just say that's fraud. The great Randy just tries to more or less dismiss them. But I don't know. I don't know. But basically, there are people who believe in it, and there are people who don't. I tend to be skeptical about it. My own self. That, past life regression. Susan Blackmore wrote about that. That's just through suggestion, and when you die, you start seeing things. And she gives a physiological reason why that happens. Kurtz wrote a book, the Skeptical Inquirer, and I kind of believe that people say, oh, I was dead, I came back, I saw my grandfather. I have my doubts. Some people believe it. Okay. Yes, sir.
I have 3 short items to contribute to the discussion. The first is, there's a train going through a little station in a town in Arizona. Train stops for 5 minutes, man gets off to stretch his legs. There's an Indian with a booth sitting there on the platform. He's got a sign that says, memory demonstration, 5 cents. So the guy thinks he'll test it. Goes up to the Indian and he says, what did you have for breakfast a year ago today? Indian says, eggs. And he says, that's amazing. You can remember what you had for breakfast a year ago today. Pays him a nickel, gets on the train. A year later, he's going through the same station. He says, I wonder if that Indian's still there. Gets off the train. Sure enough, the Indian is still there. He goes up to the Indian and he says, how? Indian says, scramble. Give me a nickel. And, the second item is the new senior citizens chant to be used at public demonstrations. What do we want? Better memory. When do we want it? Want what? And the third item, I can't remember.
Yes.
I do find, I was given a suggestion one time, especially if you're at home or something, something pops into your mind that you have to do, and you're in the bedroom or something, and you happen to go into the kitchen, and by the time you get to the kitchen, you say, I can't remember what I had to do. If you go back to where you first thought about it, it comes back into your mind, and it works.
Good. Put that in my collection. Yes, sir.
Well, one thing, I just so I mentioned that Oliver Sacks himself has a situation like nausea. He cannot remember faces. This is neural. It's not a memory loss. He can see you, see your face, but if you come back again, he cannot identify your face with you. That's just one thing. I have a little consolation, which is we don't want to lose memory, but I would contend that this idea of memory as an exact copy is a relatively recent idea, and that most of the time things change and they never stay the same, and our memory is never the same. And if you walk through one door, if you can look back through the door that just closed behind you, what you'll see is a copy of what was there when you were there, not the same thing. So this idea of memory is getting it straight is a relatively recent idea, even though we certainly don't want to lose our memories. The second thing is that as every new advance comes in technology, people lose something. So today, everybody in this room can probably multiply 2 digits together, anything under 10, and translate proportions or percentages into fractions or decimals. Most of the people who work behind the cash register today can't do that anymore. So we know things that a lot of young people have forgotten because they never learned them, they'll never know them. So
That's true. Yes.
Did he say anything about earliest memories? This is something that interests me. I remember when I was a little girl being up at my grandmother's, and my cousin David was there. He's my first cousin, but a lot older. And somebody told me that David is living with my grandmother and going to high school. And when David eventually died, it said that he graduated from high school in 1940. Well, that would mean that would have been June, of course, and that would mean that I was no older than 2.5 when I remember that conversation. And that's sort of interesting, because when I saw that, I thought, I could date that. And I think that's awfully interesting about how early people can remember things.
Well, they had a thing in the book where they suggested that you remember when you were in the crib at age 1, and that memory is, they really don't remember. So you take a kid who's 3, you remember when you were in the crib, and we gave you this, and they would remember it, but maybe it never happened. They talked about this crib thing, which they did with college students, and since it was suggested, they remembered it, but it never happened.
So this was not something that I would remember. My mother thinks she remembers seeing Haley's Comet twice, the first time when she was 2. Halley's, okay. She thought she remembered seeing that twice, the first time when she was 2. And that, of course, is something she would be told about over and over. But this little conversation was nothing anybody
Sometimes you
would.
remember something way back. I remember, I'm pretty sure I do, unless I dreamed it. I remember I fell out of a window, and I was sitting there, and Mr. Rugg, the landlord, said, he made a sound. At that time, I was 3, but I remember his face. Maybe I dreamed it up, and he said something like, tisk, tisk, you know, and I had some blood on it. Maybe that's why my memory isn't that good, because I also fell on my head. On something, and I fell out. It was just 1 floor. And I distinctly remember seeing him. However, I was 3. It could have been I dreamed it up. I could have been, but I distinctly remember that, and that was ancient history, or certainly more than half a century ago. But I remember. Yes, sir.
Does the book describe how you tell something that has been suggested to you, like one of these old memories, and that didn't really happen, from something that really did happen? When it's events that are so small that you can't imagine people, say, having a movie of it or having written it down. How do you tell them apart?
I don't think you can. I mean, if it's a legal thing, then you go to court. I mean, you say, remember, I saw you rob the bank. And then you make a case. Well, certain of those memories are legitimate and certain aren't. Then it becomes a matter of verifiability and different ways to verify it. Someone claimed he did something, and then they said he couldn't have done it because he was on a TV show at the exact time this thing happened, and he couldn't have done it. So basically, there are proofs that are empirical. Otherwise, it's up for grabs in the court of law, where someone said, well, he did this and she did. And a lot of memories are false memories, and some of them are true. And to discern the difference, there are different ways to do it, I guess. Yes, one?
Yeah. When you talk about false and true memories, I think it's not uncommon for people to remember from 2.5 and 3.
Yes.
I've had memories from that age which were verified by my family, so I believe you had a memory.
Yes, sir.
There have been various studies, and also people who have pets, for example, would say that certain animals seem to have a memory, remember things. Does the book get into any kind of animals besides humans?
But I would say that's a foregone conclusion. I believe, you have it. I don't think there's any doubt that animals remember. They remember where they put the chipmunk, they put the food here. You could say maybe it's just like, well, they put the nuts there, they know where it is. And they left it there 6 months ago, they know where to go. It's not only mammals, or you could say it's just programmed, they're not conscious of it, but even sperm cells know where to go. I don't know if that's memory.
Tom Rush sings a memory song, which you can get on YouTube, and it's quite an interesting song.
Yeah, there are a lot of memory songs. So if you know how to play the sound of music, why do I know the scale? Doe would hear, female here, A up a golden sun. So I know it far, long way to run. That's where memory makes you learn the scale. I know the scale, I know the song by heart because it's a song. Far, a long way to ample, no, because it rhymes with sun, he was eating. So basically, the rhyme really remembers it. So I know the scale without even making an effort because of the music. And Rush does it too. Once you know the music, it clicks in with even the 2-year-old kids who know their things that they may have learned when they were 80. They'll know, like all you did, you know, Jack and Jill went up. I learned that centuries ago. I'll never forget it. Once you give them the cue of the first few words, you learn, and that was from way before. What?
One other thing, oftentimes our memory is based on a sequence.
Yes.
And if we miss one word in that sequence, then the memory is not gone. And that's why a Methodist minister that I met when I was in college said that he never failed to read the Lord's Prayer, because he said, I would never chance it that I would start off the Lord's Prayer and then not remember a line. And he said, once you drop one syllable, that can block your going on. And that's why these people who sing the Star Spangled Banner should read it, not try to go on memory, because you just missed that one syllable, and then the rest of it is not going to fall into place.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.